Welcome to 15 Minutes of Pharma. My name is Carlos Pereira da Cruz, and my partner in these conversations is Manuel Fernandes. Manuel, over the last few episodes, we built a clear sequence. So first, we showed that not all manufacturing capacity is equal. Then we explored how pricing power emerges when capacity becomes scarce, admissible, or time critical. And in the last episode, we discussed why the old cheap model is losing its grip. So today I want to ask the next question very directly. So if cheap no longer decides the game, then who is actually going to control pharma manufacturing in the next phase?
Well, Carlos, I think the answer begins with one word: bottlenecks.
Bottlenecks?
Yeah, and that's because, pharma manufacturing in the next phase will not be controlled simply by whoever owns the most factories. And, well, it will not be controlled simply by whoever has the lowest cost. It will be shaped much more by whoever controls the bottlenecks the rest of the system cannot easily bypass.
So let's start there. So what exactly do you mean by a bottleneck, Manuel?
Something very simple, Carlos. A bottleneck is any point in the industrial system where value gets delayed, constrained, or put at risk because very few players can perform that step well enough, fast enough, and, well, reliably enough. Or even more simply, it is the place where the system has to queue. And, well, once the system has to queue, control starts to accumulate around whoever can keep that flow moving.
Okay, so it's not just a shortage, okay? So it's a point where dependence starts to build.
Exactly, Carlos. And well, not all bottlenecks are created the same. And, well, I think it helps to distinguish three types. And, well, I would say that the first is the capacity bottleneck. This is the most intuitive one. Physical capacity itself is limited, slow to build, hard to validate, or even difficult to replicate. For instance, there are not enough sterile lines, not enough containment, not enough specialized infrastructure. Well, that is the classic bottleneck. And Carlos, we have seen this in parts of fill finish, peptides, ADC related capacity, and, well, on other platform linked layers of the system. The second is the capability bottleneck. And, well, here the issue is not whether the facility exists. It is whether the organization actually knows how to make the process work. Can it transfer well? Can it scale robustly? Can it industrialize a difficult modality? Can it keep the process stable from development into commercial reality? This is where the bottleneck sits in process mastery. And well, that reflects a much deeper shift. Value is, really moving from the molecule to the process. And, well, then comes the third type of bottleneck, which is the execution bottleneck. And, well, this is often the least visible and the most underestimated. Here, Carlos, the problem is not mainly lack of equipment, and it is not only lack of know-how. The problem is that the organization cannot coordinate the system well enough. Tech transfer is slow, decisions are slow, quality and operations create friction, data is fragmented, planning is unstable. In other words, the bottleneck sits in execution itself. And well, in many cases, that is what customers are really buying, not just capacity, not just know-how, but the ability to turn complexity into validated output without losing time or control.
So what you're saying is that the bottleneck may not be where the equipment is rare. It may be where coordinated execution is rare.
Exactly, Carlos. And, well, I think fill finish is a very good example because fill finish looks at first sight like a classic capacity bottleneck. So there is strong demand, high barriers to entry, and limited accessible capacity. So the obvious reaction is We need more lines. But well, if you look more closely, the picture becomes more interesting, uh, because in fill finish, capacity is not just about installed lines; it's about system readiness.
Manuel, what do you mean by system readiness?
Well, Carlos, I mean that, well, the line itself may no longer be the real constraint. The real constraint may sit somewhere else. For instance, in the technology architecture, in the digital backbone between QMS and ERP, in the front end engineering, in device and delivery system supply chains, or well, simply in whether the right people are in place early enough for validation and ramp up. So, what looks like a simple capacity problem can actually be a system problem. The line may exist, but the capacity is still not truly executable. And well, that is very important because it shows that the bottleneck can really move across the system.
So the most important bottlenecks are often not single nodes, but they are, let's say, intercessions.
Absolutely, Carlos. That's the real point. The most important bottlenecks in pharma are often the places where capacity, process difficulty, and execution risk meet. Uh, and well, that is where control really accumulates because if physical capacity is difficult to replicate, the process is difficult to master, and well, if execution has to be consistently strong, then the number of credible players becomes very, very small. And well, when the number of credible players becomes small, a supplier stops being just one option among many. It really starts becoming structurally difficult to root around.
Yeah, let's come back to that the economic side. So, who wins in that kind of system? So, what kind of company becomes more powerful?
I would say, Carlos, that it will be less the generic asset owner and much more something which we may call the platform orchestrator. And
Platform orchestrator?
yeah,
Mhm.
and by that I mean the organization that can connect difficult capacity, process know-how, regulatory confidence, digital visibility, and strong execution into one coherent operating model. Uh, and well, that is a different kind of power. It's not just owning the site; it's really controlling the flow through the site. And well, once you control the flow, you become much more important to the customer because you stop being only a manufacturer. You become part of the customer's industrial architecture.
So the strongest CDMOs may evolve from vendors into something closer to industrial platforms.
Yes, absolutely, Carlos. And I think that is one of the most important shifts now underway. The CDMOs that will matter most in the next phase are not simply those with capacity. They are those that can behave like integrated industrial platforms. So they know how to transfer, how to scale, how to coordinate quality and operations, how to use data. Uh, and well, they know how to operate with discipline under pressure. And because they do all of that repeatedly, they become more than suppliers. They become part of the sector's enabling infrastructure.
So that also means control is not only about scarcity, it's also about this repeatability. Mhm.
Very much so, Carlos. Because, one successful transfer is not enough. Control accumulates where performance becomes repeatable, where customers trust the organization not only to solve one problem, but well, to keep solving difficult problems again and again. And well, that creates something very important, which is industrial credibility. And well, once customers trust that your operating system can absorb complexity, you stop competing only on individual projects. You start becoming the default destination for certain kinds of work.
Okay. And Manuel, one topic that we mentioned in previous episodes what's geography. So how does geography enter here?
Yeah, Carlos. Yeah, sure. Geography still matters a great deal,
Okay.
but I would say that it matters less as a simple cost variable and more as a control variable. Different regions will matter for different bottlenecks. For instance, the US remains extremely important because of market gravity, capital depth, and domestic demand concentration. Asia remains indispensable because of ecosystem scale and because of manufacturing depth. And well, Europe may become even more relevant in the segments where regulatory credibility, specialized know-how, and trusted execution matter most. So we are not moving towards one geography of control. We are moving toward a differentiated map where different geographies become central to different strategic bottlenecks.
Okay, so what you're saying is that the future is not one winner takes all. It's a more selective map of industrial influence.
That's it precisely, Carlos.
Mm.
The system may still look fragmented on the surface. Many companies, many suppliers, many sites. But, well, underneath that surface, strategic influence may become much more concentrated because more and more value may have to pass through a relatively small number of critical bottlenecks. And well, that is where the real leverage will sit.
So, Manuel, if I try to summarize, so the future of pharma manufacturing may be shaped less by who owns capacity in general and more by who controls the bottlenecks, so the intersections between capacity, process difficulty, and execution risk meet. Mm.
That's exactly the point, Carlos.
Mm.
And well, once you say it that way, the next questions become much sharper, and we can ask questions such as, which organizations control those intersections, which ones are becoming, the default route, which are building, repeatable industrial credibility. Um, which ones are evolving into true platforms rather than remaining interchangeable vendors. Those are the questions that reveal who is really becoming powerful.
And what does that mean for originators?
Yeah, that's a great question, Carlos. And I would say that it means that manufacturing strategy becomes much more central because, if certain bottlenecks are becoming structurally difficult to bypass, then partner of choice becomes strategic. You are not just buying supply, you are choosing which control points your portfolio will depend on. So, do you secure access early? Do you commit long term? Do you diversify? Uh, will you be co investing? Will you be building internal alternatives? You know, those decisions matter much more when the bottlenecks are real and when the number of credible routes is limited. So, this is not only a manufacturing question, it's also a portfolio question.
Okay, and I suppose that also changes how investors should look at CDMOs.
Very much so, Carlos, because the real question is no longer only how much capacity does this company own. The more revealing question is which bottlenecks does it control? How hard are they to replicate? How strong is the operating model around them? Uh, how embedded is the company in future therapeutic flows? And well, how much of its advantage comes from execution rather from simple asset ownership? Carlos, this is because in the next phase, industrial position may matter more than industrial size. Size is visible, but position is decisive.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so position is decisive. So, Manuel, if you had to summarize this whole discussion in one central idea, how would you put it?
I would say, Carlos, that the future of pharma manufacturing will be shaped not simply by those who own scarce assets, but by those who control the bottlenecks where scarce capacity, difficult processes, and execution under complexity come together. That is where dependence forms. It's where customers queue. That is where trust compounds and where control begins to accumulate. So, in the next phase, power will sit less with those who own capacity in general and more with those whose operating platforms the rest of the system cannot easily route around.
Okay, and that also means this is no longer just a technical discussion. So it becomes a question of strategy, investment, and industrial policy.
That's you nailed it perfectly, Carlos. Because once bottlenecks become strategic, their location and control stop being neutral. They matter to boards, to investors, to health systems, and in some cases, they matter to governments. And well, that is why this conversation matters. So we are no longer just asking who can manufacture. We are asking who gets to shape the industrial architecture on which the next phase of pharma will depend.
Okay, so yeah, this is something to reflect. So Manuel, thank you. And thank you to all of you for listening to the 15 Minutes of Pharma. So in this episode, we explored why the future of pharma manufacturing may be shaped less by generic capacity and more by control over the bottlenecks where capacity, process mastery, and execution reliability meet. So I hope to see you in the next episode. So episode number 10 will be about the CDMO of the future. Thank you, Manuel.
Thank you, Carlos. Always a pleasure.